So why don't we start on the Roe v. Wade story here? And like I was saying before, Lynsey, the way this starts is there were a group of us that started a birth control and abortion referral center at the University of Texas for women that were interested in trying to pursue those options. And we had a little office in the YWCA, which was part of the RAG office, which was an underground newspaper there. And so we would sit there, and women would come in, and then we would also get phone calls because our number was handed around. There were phone calls that would come in, and Jim can remember these because sometimes...
Middle of the night, my sister thinks she's pregnant, wake you up about 3 o'clock, and I would say, I think you want to talk to Judy, just...
So we, several of us became, again, the sort of contact points for women who wanted to figure out what to do. And we would end up, in some cases, driving them to Mexico. In other cases, getting them to San Antonio because there were some legal abortions there. But we did know it was illegal, and we were concerned about that. So
it had a narrow legality. I forget exactly what the span of permitted. It's something like, health of them or life of the mother, and it had to be assessed by a couple of physicians. There were some conditions. Remember the young Mexican woman? You could. Right.
But so anyway, we were concerned that we might be running some risk by actually doing the referral service. So we wanted to talk to someone. So that's where we talked to Sarah Weddington, who's the person who ended up being the attorney for Roe v. Wade. Is basically by just saying to her, we're worried about this. Is there any way that you can kind of research it for us and tell us what our situation is here so that we'll at least know? Basically, the call came in on public phones. So it wasn't like we ran a line that said, okay, you can call here for abortion.
It was a payphone.
Oh. Right.
Mm-hmm. Or else private. No, I mean, there was no attention. Now you're used to it. You're geared all up for attention from evangelicals, etc. That's automatic. But even when they started the clinic here, there were no protesters. Nobody noticed it. It just was...
the right to life really wasn't very organized. I mean, until Roe v. Wade actually hit, and the decision got made by the Supreme Court, they weren't really mobilized to really get involved very much.
The Board of Regents passed a reg that said you couldn't sell newspapers on them. And we went to, I went to Dave Richards, who used to be married to Ann Richards, who was a governor. This
is all the 6th degree of separation. Their daughter is now the national head of Planned Parenthood. These little things that kind of follow each other.
And essentially it's a very short order because the lower court, the way the system was set up then, the lower 3-judge panel then struck down the regulation.
I was going to say, this is very much the legal side. Our side was a little more focused on the women, but...
It was easy to see, like, I remember the AG, the assistant AG, and having been an assistant AG here, I know how the guy felt. I felt sorry for him then, but you could tell the panel thought it was a bunch of shit. Who gives a damn what these kids, let them have their ratty little newspapers, why don't you? That's basically what their order said. So they went to the state appeal to the Supreme Court. So after that, Judy said, hey, boy, that was easy. I wonder if we could challenge abortion restrictions the same way.
I just thought, if that works that way, why don't we just even try to come in with something?
I remember your remark. You said it'll take, if we have to fight this out state by state, it'll take 100 years. And so she said, do you think Sarah would think about it? What does it cost for us to get into federal court? And back then I said $15. That was a filing fee.
And it's classic. We actually raised money for the case through bake sales.
What? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because we couldn't really pay Sarah very much.
And I went to Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah was a very smart person who was a minister's daughter who was married to Ron Weddington, a classmate of mine at law school. They divorced over this case. Basically, his narcissism could not stand the fact that suddenly she was preeminent. He told her, you'll never win, this is silly, it's a waste of time. She worked as a secretary, she typed like hell, type over 100 words a minute on those old. She'd gotten out of law school. Nobody would hire her. They didn't hire women except to bury them occasionally in the basement. And we were talking 1971, two. On a federal question, you can automatically appeal a state Supreme Court ruling on a federal issue. But there was another issue, the way to get at it. If you wanted to go after a statute, you could, for federal questions, you would file it as a 3-judge panel issue, and there you'd have 1 circuit judge and 2 local district judges. And there was automatic appeal to the Supreme Court from that. Actually, a device set up to block review, but like so many things, it had unexpected consequences, which is that federal judges who deal with a lot of tedious bullshit kind of like constitutional issues. They're interesting. When I was a judge in this district, I sat in on several condemnation cases. It was like, so federal judges love that shit. Well, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, had appointed the first woman.
Here comes the women's part again. Let's use the other part. Go ahead and talk about Sarah Hughes.
I will. Sarah T. Hughes was the first woman U.S. District Court judge. Lyndon Johnson appointed her. Sarah Weddington and her friend Linda Coffey, who was a lawyer then up in Dallas, wanted the case to be brought in front of Sarah T. And so that's why it was Roe v. Wade. Wade was the district attorney for Dallas. Roe was, and basically Judy said, we'll get you a filing fee, we'll find you a client, which they did. And away they went. I mean, after that, Sarah it was remarkable. But she weathered her way through well, this is a juicy case. A little twit like you shouldn't be handling something like this.
They didn't exactly say that.
They didn't say that, but they basically said you're in over your head.
We have more resources, and you're new, and
you're new. You don't know what you're doing.
We can handle the case better than you can.
But this goes on all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's how Sarah got into it. We didn't know then that she had actually had her own illegal abortion.
That's in that book.
And this is the first time you found out about that, was through the book?
Yeah, we didn't know she'd had an abortion. That wasn't something that she talked about.
Right.
But that's often people's motivation for some of this is their own personal experience, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, Judy just picked her out because she liked her.
Yeah. Because while this was going on, while Jim actually helped some of the case, we were still doing our work back in the little office. We were still helping women find places to actually get abortions. We were still marching around in rallies. We were still going up to the legislature and picketing, and when a law would come that we didn't really like. So we were this ongoing prong of the actual delivery.
Tell her about your Mexico trip for the clinics.
Well, myself and another friend of mine that were graduate students in molecular biology, but we had a lot of science background, felt we could go check out clinics. So we went down to Mexico and took a trip and went and looked at all those clinics along the border and asked what their procedures were and talked to them about what they would do in certain situations. And then we picked a couple that we were comfortable referring to. So those are the ones that we would refer to. And on occasion, a couple of times, we actually drove the women down because they themselves didn't have cars to actually get there.
How far was that?
Maybe 4 hours, depending on where you went.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah, so
wasn't that far. I remember we had one young woman who was the sole support of her something like 12 brothers and sisters and parents got pregnant, and she had been preliminarily approved by a San Antonio clinic for an abortion for health reasons. And I remember we drove her down to San Antonio, and she went into the room and came out crying. They decided they weren't going to do it, so they took her to Mexico. But I always thought, it was always amused me to think of these Mexican doctors being, faced off by these two gringo young women who had science backgrounds, because the last thing they wanted was for a couple of white women to come in and say, this place is dirty, because they depended on the illegality of the process for their business. I mean, these things are like, like cancer clinics are set up these days along the Mexican border. That's what these were too. So it was a big deal to them.
And going through customs was pretty weird too, because pretty much the customs people would know what this young women were coming through for.
Which is even more intimidating.
Yeah, right. And you'd have to try to just shut them up, just say, we're just here, we're going to go through, don't bother us, blah, 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 and not have the woman herself have to engage with them, if all possible. So.
Yeah, the Canadian women used to come here for the Mountain because, I mean, that was a big deal. Now it's the other way. It can be the other way around. But back then there was no across-the-board legality for abortions in Canada.
So back to the when I was saying that we were sort of continuing on and not paying that much attention to the court case, we were really shocked when we got a phone call saying that we had won. We had no idea. It just came and out of the blue.
Just one.
Yeah. And Sarah had I think it was her secretary or something, call us because she had just heard from however people hear the results of a Supreme Court decision.
Calls them.
They just called us and said, okay, well, looks like we won. And we didn't even know the grounds that we won on. Because Sarah had argued it on different grounds than privacy, really. So I always say this is the example where the women's movement did this work. It wasn't really the legal establishment. It wasn't really Planned Parenthood, per se. It was a group of women who did this work. And all of a sudden, we ended up where we are. And that's that connection back to Blue Mountain, because when I moved up here, that was my same goal, is get a group of women together and do the work. And yeah, you have to find a doctor, and yeah, you have to get a physical presence to do the procedure, but do it differently and make sure that there's going to be that kind of support for it in the community through women, and that's what we did. And that's how Blue Mountain's always been different, in my opinion, too. In fact, in your history, you'll probably find this. A lot of us, when we started it, we wanted to be Blue Mountain Women's Clinic. And it was very important to us to keep that focus on women and what they needed and what they wanted, as opposed to making it a family clinic, which is more how it's sort of marketed today, which, people have made some different decisions, and that's okay. But when we got started, that's what we really wanted. And
it still is that kind of feminist-centered.
Yeah, I think it is, too. I think people changed the name and did that because of the political reality that's around now.
And also, why shouldn't abortion be offered in any kind of family practice setting?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
So,
but I think claiming the feminist history and tradition is real important. Yeah, that was another interesting part of it, going and recruiting a physician. Because again, it was just a group of us.
Right.
Going in and knocking on doors and talking to physicians about would they be willing to actually come over and do a abortion at a free standing little clinic. And we couldn't find anyone local that was really interested in working with us. But we found one guy who he was very skilled, but he had very few social skills. And so we worked with him, and then only later did people like Doug Weber and those other guys that worked at the emergency rooms come in. They were really not the first line of medical people that we worked with.
But how did it happen? How did you end up moving up here? And then how did you end up meeting all of the other women that would end up?
Okay, well, we moved up here. Jim and I moved up here basically together. And we moved up here in some ways because, at least for me, and I assume for you, we wanted to live in a place like Montana. So we wanted to live around the mountains and the natural beauty and not be in a city. And
But with your careers, neither of you were concerned that moving to Montana was going to...
Well, I wasn't concerned. Jim actually pursued his. He's been a judge. I mean, that hasn't been a problem for him. But for me, that, I knew all along it wasn't something that, was not going to be a research scientist or, do that kind of work. So I was willing to come up and just look around and see what I could put together. So that's what I did. And then when I got here, there had been a group of women who had at least on some basis been meeting and talking about women's health. And so I met them and talked with them and said, I'm really motivated to get a clinic here that would do abortions, because that's the work I've been doing before I moved here. And would you like to join me in that work? And they said yes. And so that's really how it happened.
Who were they?
Well,
Annie McClay.
Annie McClay was a nurse who was willing to do it. There were Barb and Pat Tucker were sisters.
Yeah, Jennifer Thompson.
Well, she came along. So that Lynn actually was involved in helping do it at the first part, and we rented a room, we painted the room, we got furniture, and we went to Seattle. I went to Seattle to get some training at a women's clinic to learn how to do the different procedures and get the standing, orders and all those kinds of things that other clinics were using. So it was pretty much like we knew it could happen. We were just going to do it. And one time, we invited Sarah Weddington when she was here. She had some connections in Montana, and when she was here, she and I did a little program targeting young women, saying both of us were in our 20s when we did this. Think what you can do. Don't think it's outside of your possibility and experience to do this, because you have to think big to get some big things done. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know how many young women that were sitting there took us up on that, but that's an important message to us. I haven't seen her in a while, but my guess is that she would say the same thing now.
To think big?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And to realize that any action that you take now, even though you don't see the outcome right away, can be build into something else.
Like having the idea, just maybe try a little thing like Roe V. Wade and see if we could just get it.
Yeah.
Because why not? It's $15.
Right. Exactly.
It's amazing.
And you have the resources, you can do it. So.
Yeah. And now it's one of the biggest,
mm-hmm.
one of the most famous.
Mm-hmm. And we, of course, didn't have any reason to know that would happen.
No.
It's just, let's do it. We know women need it. And so to me, it's very much that whole feminist empowerment thing. Both empowering to the people who choose to actually get involved and make it happen, but for the women themselves that need the procedure. It's an empowerment thing. So that's, to me, what the whole Blue Mountain tradition is a part of, the early feminism. And it was there just a few years, then it outgrew that and moved over to the thing on Kensington, which is where it was firebombed.
Or by like Osco drug kind of, or...
Right. And it was there until it got firebombed and then knocked out. Well, again, the need was so dramatic, the word got out, and we would get all kinds of people calling saying they wanted to come and get procedures done. But for a while, maybe all of Montana, that was open.
Right.
There were some places you could go that weren't open. And then actually Planned Parenthood of Billings started doing some procedures. So Planned Parenthood got into and then eventually some doctors in Bozeman and in Flathead area started offering it out of their offices. But that came later, after. But Armstrong, he was this Kalispell doctor, and Jim actually both of us got involved with him to try to do something about the Montana Abortion Control Act, which was here when we moved here. And it basically said abortion was illegal, and we said, no, Roe v. Wade is passed now, and it can't be illegal. And we worked with him to get that struck. And he was doing procedures in his own office. And, some doctors had that dedication to it, that they would do it because they had seen some of the problems that, illegal abortions brought. Mm-hmm. He had worked at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, so he absolutely knew what could happen. One time I saw him back over at Green Mountain when there was another gathering of people who'd been involved, and he had stopped doing his work in Kalispell. So we were just talking about the Abortion Control Act here in Montana, mm-hmm. and James Armstrong.
Oh yeah.
What year was the Abortion Control Act?
Well, that was passed before we moved here.
After Roe v. Wade, of course. We moved up here after Roe v. Wade, but in fact we moved up here during the Watergate hearings.
Well, you moved up here. I was still in Austin for a while.
You were about 6 months later. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I moved up in February and she came up in August of '73. I took the bar and had a job with a local firm. And I had an ACLU-funded case against the Abortion Control Act, which eliminated, again, it was a 3-judge panel, and had Dr. Armstrong as a plaintiff, and brought it against against the state. It was pretty successful, except on one notification issue, I think, and we didn't appeal that. ACLU was awful to deal with. Oh, they were awful, absolutely awful, as far as I was concerned. I'm sure I was frustrating to them too. I did a number of depositions, which they said they'd fund and then backed out. The more liberal lawyers after that could never understand why I would never join the ACLU. Never again. They've since changed, obviously. So,
Well,
but that eliminated that basically.
yeah, if it stayed on the books, but it had little marks drawn through parts of it, and the worry always was that if Roe v. Wade was really challenged itself and went down, then that would come back up. We'd have an Abortion Control Act here in Montana, so they didn't remove it completely, which was frustrating. In fact, you might still, I don't know, would it still be in a law book?
It might be.
Because, of course, if the legislature ever had a chance here, they would immediately get rid of any access to abortion.
Unless their 15-year-old daughter needed one.
Well, that's the other thing that I'm sure you've heard since you've been around Blue Mountain, is that we would get these kids, sometimes with their mothers, who were right to life.
Mm-hmm.
And they would, but it's different for their daughter. They were in there. That we always found that remarkable at the beginning. We used to comment on that. How okay, now look at this. This is so and so's daughter who is out there picketing us sometimes.
Oh, it was one of the legislators who was, I think his daughter got one. It was one of the chief anti-abortion senators or whatever in the state legislature. His own daughter had.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so it's pretty common. Probably still is.
Well, because they figure they're privileged. I mean, nobody who has a reasonable amount of money is ever going to be denied an abortion. Maybe in this country they could be, but they can go somewhere else, and they always do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, even when it was totally illegal here, there were ways that you could arrange to go get them in other countries. A number of the people that were involved in getting Blue Mountain started had also been at the Women's Resource Center on campus. There was kind of a flow of the women that were interested.
So, how did this work? Because you also started the Women's Resource Center and the Women's and Gender Studies program, right?
Well, it wasn't a program then. It was just that we had to do it almost as independent study because there wasn't an official program. But yeah, I was involved in doing those classes.
So, when you moved to Montana, what was the first project?
I walked over to the campus thinking that I might be able to figure out how to get a job in their extension or some kind of less disciplinary program, because I had done that at UT Austin.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked with people, and they really didn't have much there. And they didn't have a women's center. So the first project was really to try to get the women's center started. And again, drawing a group of women together that were interested and saying, okay, let's take some space. So where the UC market is now, that first floor over at the UC, that was the women's research. And it was empty, so that's how we could get it. And we just said to them, okay, we want this. It'll be a student thing, although we'll have some people like myself who are either get a faculty affiliated, some sort of status or whatever to help with it. And we got started. And we did brown bags and assertiveness training and various things like that, classes. We were there. So that got started. Then some of the women that were involved there were part of the conversation about let's start a clinic. And also let's start Women's Place, which was the other referral thing.
You did women's? You were involved in Women's Place too? Oh no.
Well, it was just, to me, since I moved here, the thing was to say, what do women need here?
Everything.
And then, yeah, exactly. Then let's get it going. Let's do it. I've always been one of those people. Let's just do the thing. Let's not focus on what we can't do. Let's focus on what we can do.
Right.
Get it done.
Yeah.
And what's been great, Lynsey, is that most of them have gone on, like the Women's Resource Center, although it's smaller and kind of different focus, is still there. Blue Mountain is still there. Word is still there again, although it's been cut back some and has somewhat of a different focus. It's still going. The one that really isn't going is Women's Place, and that was just too hard to maintain. If you come from that real place where women are, they're going to keep going. And I've never believed that younger women are not going to keep abortion legal, or keep some of the things around rape and those kind of programs available.
Thank you.
I just don't believe that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Because that's frustrating to be working on these issues and then have someone call you
I'm sure.
or say to you, "Where are the younger women?" It's like,
Oh, you're looking at one.
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm totally positive about that. And especially in Missoula, we've been very, I think, fortunate that there's been lots of young women who've always been interested and always want to come to the programs and always want to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just not, to me, it's just not that kind of issue.
It's about finding ways to involve them where they feel welcome.
Yeah, exactly. And I've said this to my friends. It's about not holding the leadership positions. It's because what are they going to do? Come in and then just always be, lesser? Then they're not going to want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to have a chance to become the executive director or whatever it is that's going to, have some of that higher decision-making power.
Right.
So.
Which is also why it's been so amazing your career has been, to watch you just kind of move from thing to thing and not become one of those stagnant
Right.
people.
Well, that's what you have to do.
Right.
To leave space, you have to move. And I think not enough people do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit different than your experience.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit different than your experience.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another kind of interesting thing. How we got the money to start Blue Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, this was an idea that we tried. We kind of got the idea from seeing what other places were doing to raise capital by pre-selling things. Well, we weren't going to pre-sell abortions, of course. But we told people that if you'll give us a note, we'll pay you back at a certain point once we have enough going on here, enough demand to pay you back. And if it's okay with you, we would only pay you back minimally what the law requires. So that's how we raised our capital. It's just people were willing to give it to us at a very low interest rate because they were basically supportive of wanting us to get the clinic started. So we had these notes, and I think you may have helped us draw up the note. I don't remember. Anyway, we had these notes, and we sold them to people and got the money and rented that space and built the furniture and did the thing.
I remember the furniture.
Yeah.
Trying to get the stuff made before the first day of opening, and there were a couple of people there who had no idea about timing. They would still be putting on stain that wouldn't be dry the next day. It was just like,
Oh, no.
Well, that's it. People don't need to know. I mean, that's fine. I actually think it's valuable to know. But when people are there getting a procedure done, they don't need to know that the furniture was just made the day before.
No, they don't need to know that.
So, but that's kind of what happened.
I mean, it wasn't. They didn't have the money to go buy any furniture. They just made it out of 2x4s or something.
Well, I don't think it was 2x4s.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't 2x4s.
Something.
But yeah, I wasn't. When they walked in, we wanted it to look, friendly and comfortable and safe. And so people spent time thinking, what kind of wall hanging do you want to put on here, and what kind of counseling room do you want to have? And so all of that was part of the conversation.
And all of that still exists.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. It has to.
The low lighting in all of the rooms and feminist purple everywhere, and it's comfy and homey. Real blankets to put over women's shoulders,
Right. So that's the tradition that started, and I'm, not at all surprised it continues.
Yeah. It's a really important piece, and it's something that is not, those ergonomic details don't really exist around the world.
No, I know.
Or in other clinics.
I know. But that's the whole women's clinic model, too. Now, a number of the women's clinics don't necessarily still exist, but when I went out and got some training at the one in Seattle, that was part of their focus. In fact, we met the guy who developed the whole suction for the vacuum aspiration thing, and little foot pump that could be used for the pressure, because he was just really committed to the idea that women all around the world should be able to get this. So if you're somewhere where there's no electricity, how would you do it? So no, we never did that, but that was part of the conversation.
I remember one doctor, I can't remember his name, who came to talk to you guys. I went to a speech, and he was actually in tears because people brought flowers. He gave a speech, and there was a bouquet, and he's used to being screamed at, yelled at, threatened.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Well, that's.
it really blew him away that people were approving. I remember him looking at those flowers saying, "Oh, I've never seen something."
Mhm. Yeah, it's different for doctors too to get into that kind of environment. They aren't used to it. They don't understand how people who are very supportive and positive would create a space and thank those that are involved.
Yeah.
Well, Tony Jute, who's a historian, dead now, but was basically a left-wing sort of historian, said the first thing women do, and he was talking mostly about Eastern Europe then, the first thing any liberalizing atmosphere is gain reproductive control. You know, that's the first thing they do is take steps. Abortion's just part of that subset. And of course, it's preventing it is a one of the main strategies about keeping control of women. You can really see that.
Which is why it's the church.
Yes, always church. I mean, it's just part of the thing about marriage, reproductive, contraception, abortion, etc. I hadn't really thought about it very much, but that's why it's so important for it to be a comfortable place. You don't really need to worry about that if you're going in to get your knee operated on. I mean, you expect a bit. It's nice to have a good place to sit down on, but you don't. There's no social and theological issue around getting your knee worked on. So you don't need the reassurance that you're an acceptable human being, which is what the nice decor gives, doesn't it? I mean, it makes, because you're constantly having to war with the image the other side projects, which is that you're anti-human, that you're something evil about you, something deficient, something's unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you have women, I mean, I don't know, but don't you think most of the women who come there come with some ambivalence? I mean, they don't take it casually, getting an abortion.
And especially with those protesters standing there every week. Except you just can't avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, they're not born and bred radicals. They just are young women who got pregnant in the normal course of things and show up, and suddenly there are these people that look like their relatives. No, it really works on them. I remember the since defeated county attorney in Mineral County, Sean Donovan, and I knew him from a long time ago. He was really upset that I had anything to do with Roe v. Wade, etc. He said, "I can't believe it. It's just, really?" He said, "Well, what about people who want to have an abortion just because it would interfere with their vacation plans?" Well, I mean, my own feeling is that's up to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I said, what's the alternative? Have someone like you deciding whether they should do it? Well, he said he's fine with that. Or they shouldn't have kids. Okay, so make them have the kids and then take the kids from them. And if they're blonde, they're going to be, you can adopt them out. But if they're not, there was a lawsuit here in 10 years ago where the state got sued because the kid who was adopted had some sort of autistic issue or some other medical problem, and the state had to take the kid back. It was basically a warranty thing. It was like returning a toaster. The toaster doesn't work, so take it back. The court said, "Yeah, you warranty the health of the kid." I mean, that's the flip side of that. They think they can make people have kids, and that's just the circumstance that creates a disturbed child, isn't it? And of course, they get no support from the religious community. Someone once said, anti-choicers believe that life starts at conception and ends at birth. I mean, they have no interest in, they're hostile actually to welfare or to any support.
Well, not if they really cared about kids, which is what they like to pretend they do.
Yeah.
It only makes sense if you want to try to keep women in bondage, basically. Then it makes sense. Well, Douglas, one of the one of the concurring justices in Roe v. Wade said that having a child is the single most determinant of a woman's future. He was an old guy, but he got that.
Well, it's not a short-term thing; it's a long-term.
I used to deal with this with why is a kid not talking to you?
Exactly.
Why would they not come? You know, they don't like to hear that. They don't like to be told, well, you're failed as a parent, basically, if you haven't, you know, you're all right for getting an allowance to go to the football game, but on the important things in their life, they don't trust you. So what does that mean? They don't want to face that. They're the ones who think, well, if you mention sex around kids, then that's what gets them interested in it. I can't, you know, there's something psychologically disturbed in that position. Kids are interested in sex from day one.
Well,
virtually.
it's just human nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not even human nature, animal nature.
Right.
Right.
So.
Well, it's going to be an interesting next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. It will be. But again, like I said, I'm sure people like yourself will do the things that need to get done. I don't think it'll just be given up and go away. You know, it'll stay the focus of some energy. You have to see.